So today I want to show you a few interesting features of the new quantizer modules from Sequoia. The first one is the built-in sample and hold. Here I have a pitch sequence of 5 steps with a penta sequencer. This is sequencing the twist VCO, but I'm using here only a 7-step sequence to trigger it. And you can see I have 3 steps active, so we get a longer sequence. Right, it will sound like this. Right, and I guess that you can already hear that even though I have only the 3 steps active, the pitch changes more often. Right, and that's not an issue of the sequencer or anything, it's just because the twist VCO has a longer decay and the notes just sneak in between the triggers. But again, Quant here, this quantizer, has a built-in trigger input that will act as a sample and hold. So there will be a change in pitch only together with the triggers. So if I use the same triggers to trigger also the quantizer, right now the pitch will change only together with the trigger sequence. Again, if I take it out, right, and again with. Right, so now we get only pitch changes on these steps here of the trigger sequencer. I will add some delay to this here. Right, now this is also great when using something like an LFO to create arpeggios or sequences. Here I have an LFO that I'm sending directly to the quantizer. Let me solo this for a second, it will sound like this. Right, so first of all, it's a bit wild because it's going all over the place, so we can attenuate it again directly from the quantizer itself. Right, something like this. And now again, I can use triggers to sample this LFO in sync with the clock. And get sorts of arpeggios. The voice itself, by the way, is the VCO going through 2 different bandpass filters with some modulation. Right, so now we are sampling this LFO and everything directly from the quantizer itself. Now this will work also really nicely for chords and harmonies. Right, here I have the classic VCO and I'm using the 4-channel version of the quantizer. And I'm using to quantize, I'm using just another output here from the 5-step pitch sequence. Right, but we will eventually get also chords. So again, let me just solo this for a second. This is how it sounds like now. Again, we have the 5-step sequence. But let's now turn this into chords and harmonies. So first of all, I will use polyphony in this case. In the right-click menu, I can choose which channels or how many channels to sum into a polyphonic signal. In this case, I'm going to use all of them, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right, so now all the channels, all 4 channels are going out from the first output as a polyphonic signal. And for now, as you can hear, the channels are the same, but again, we can trigger each channel differently. For example, with a dedicated trigger sequencer. Right, so here I have a sequence of 4 steps. This will trigger channel 1. Then a sequence with 6 steps. This will trigger channel 2. A sequence with 7. And a sequence with 8. So we have 8 different trigger sequences. And already we get chords and harmonies because again, this 5-step sequence will be sampled at different times. And we have 4 different channels now of pitch. We can even change the octaves per voice. So if, for example, I take the 8-step channel here, maybe 2 octaves down, we get a sort of a bass. Right, and all of this from within the quantizer itself. Another feature I really like is the ability to transpose the signal, offset the signal, but before the quantization, so everything stays in scale. Here I have a sequence with ions and dark energy, and I'm using the yellow sequence here as a pitch sequence. It will sound like this. Right, and now I can use an external signal to offset and transpose this sequence up and down, and I can do this, for example, with the blue sequence here of ions. I'm running it with a divided clock. So if I send this to the offset input here of the quantizer, right, this will offset the sequence, but everything will still stay in scale, because it will stay within the notes you selected on the quantizer itself. Here, just for fun, I have a kick and hi-hat. So I'm using two plats here, two macro oscillator 2, one as a kick, one as a hi-hat, sequencing them with the gate sequencer from Impromptu, and I have here the lovely mixer here, press duck, to add some character to everything. Right, and then here I have a 3-step sequence with the ADDR sequencer. Right, and I'm using 3 different random signals to offset it again up and down, in this case randomly. So I'm using one sequence but with a bigger version of the quantizer, so I can have 3 channels. Again, I'm using polyphony, and the voice itself is the VCO, VCV VCO, going through the wave shaper. Maybe I will solo this for a second. Right, so we get 3 different 3-step sequences that are being offset up and down. And everything stays within the scale, within the notes I selected here. This just needs a nice bass that I have here with the Euclidean sequencer and kick all from Befaco. The last feature I want to show you, and this opens up so many possibilities, is the ability to save snapshots or programs and switch between them. So first of all, there are many different scales already saved. Here we have this scale knob. To the left, we can have minor scales. To the right, major scales. And again, here we have a CV input that we can switch between them. But we can also store our own presets or snapshots or programs. Right, so if, for example, I want to save this collection or selection of notes, I just double-click Store, and it will save it to this program. I can switch to a different one and have a different selection, right? And then store it and then switch between them, right? And we have up to 32 programs that we can store and switch between. So really this can add lots and lots of movement. I have here a sequence, a 12-step sequence, sequencing Horus. Let me unmute this, right? There is also, of course, some delay involved. Right, and for now I'm using again the quantizer, but it's set just with the note C. So let's say this is the first program I want. I can store it again, double-click Store, and then go to the second program, and then in this case I will have C and G. Now if I want to listen to this, I just have to click Set. Right, and now I can store this again, and then go to another program, and let's have C, E flat, and G and B flat, and then again set it, so we can listen to it, and then store it. Right, so now we have 3 programs saved. And there is also an auto mode, this one here, that if I enable this, it will automatically switch between the programs and snapshots. Right, it will automatically load them when you switch between them. Right, so now again we can switch between these programs and create an evolving sequence, even though it's just a 12-step sequence. So here, for example, I have the ADDR that I can use to sequence this. So now we have a bit more movement. Again, here I have a 12-step sequence. On the ADDR, I have a 5-step sequence, so the sequences will meet each other at different points in time, and we get something with a bit more movement and variation. Right, this will work, of course, also with a bigger version of the quantizer with the 4-channel one. Here again, I have the penta sequencer. I'm using in this case 3 of its outputs. And again, I have a few programs set here on the quantizer, using again the ADDR to switch between them. The voice itself I have here is 3 VCV VCOs with lots of modulation, mixed with again the pressed duck. Right, so again, we have a 5-step sequence, but thanks to the programs or snapshots, we have something much longer and more complex. I also have here a bass with the same idea. Right, in this case there are 8 steps for the pitch, but again I'm using an ADDR to switch between the programs and get something a bit more complex, more evolving. Right, the voice itself is the classic VCO, filter, delay, and I have also a sub-bass with a sine oscillator here. Right, so you can hear the movement even though I'm using a 12-step sequence, a 5-step sequence, an 8-step sequence, still we get lots and lots of movement. It's much more complex. And that's it. I hope you could see how much potential these quantizers have and how useful they can be. Thank you again for watching. Cheers.